This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Buongiorno a tutti, I am Paolo Sironi, your host of The Banker's Bookshelf. The Banker's Bookshelf is a podcast inspired by authors and researchers of the most interesting books and papers which are finding a prominent space in the libraries of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs. Today, I have a guest from the City of London. He's Christian Keller, the Chief Economist of Barclays Investment Bank. In the occasion of this year's World Economic Forum, Barclays published a research in collaboration with IBM Institute for Business Value that Christian directed. And I had the privilege to work with Christian in the making of this paper. Let me thank him, first of all, because working together has been enriching. And I'm happy he joined us today because I know there is so much that our audience can also learn from our conversation today. Christian, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Christian, thanks, especially because I know that you just came back from long-haul travel, so you might be very tired today, but this is such an interesting paper that we couldn't miss the chance of sharing with the audience. As usual, in the Banker's Bookshelf, I share an overview of the paper with our audience, and then we deep dive into these research insights together. Okay, and now I remind everyone this is a very interesting paper published by Barclays in collaboration with the IBM Institute for Business Value. The title is AI Revolution, Productivity Boom and Beyond, and has been signed, the foreword has been signed by the CEO of Barclays, Krishnan. Now, as new tools such as ChatGPT have emerged, much has been written about the explosive growth of generative AI and how it could transform our world. However, less analysis has been done to assess how AI may unlock meaningful gains in labor productivity. This new report wants to help companies, investors, and society better understand if and how AI could lead to tangible improvements in productivity across a range of industries, defined as output per hour worked. Now, understanding ease of access and versatility of new technology is core to answering the question, and that has been investigated in this paper. But this question is not new. The world operates in a digitized economy since 20 years at least, and we always associate higher digitalization with higher productivity. Yet, information technology hasn't brought the long-term boost in world gross domestic product that many had hoped for. In fact, productivity growth has been on a downswing since the 2000s. With this in mind, this paper explores AI potential to power a productivity boom that bolsters economies far into the future. Now, when we read the paper, such as I did, which you can download from the website of Barclays Investment Bank, you will discover real case studies to show how the integration of AI has already led to significant gains in productivity. For example, there will be use cases and case studies from experiences of Indian companies in Gurgaon and food flavorings giants in Baltimore. Most of all, this research identifies how broad adoption of AI could help to tackle some of the longer-term challenges facing the global economy, offsetting the effects of aging workforces in developed markets while supporting real income growth in developing economies. Importantly, the paper presents some of the guardrails that need to be in place to manage the cost to society from the rapid growth of AI. Capitalizing on this groundbreaking technology in an intelligent, sensitive way is likely to require a very human response, a collaborative effort from industries and regulators. So without much ado, I will let Christian expand on all these topics. Christian, are you ready?
Yes, thanks, Paolo. I think you mentioned something already, which is what economists call the productivity puzzle. And that is that since the early 2000s, really, we have seen across most economies a very low productivity growth, despite the fact that, we had a lot of inventions in a way, the smartphone, tablets, etc., which you would have thought should have boosted productivity if you think, what it meant for us in terms of how we interact daily, social media, etc. And there have been a few explanations for this. And, some of them simply point to the time lag. We look at history, between, let's say the invention of the light bulb and, and the full electrification and the productivity boost that brought. There was a long period from the, 1870s all the way to the 2020s. You had a period in the 90s with the high productivity, and that was generally considered to come from the computerization, even though the first personal PCs you had already, in the early 70s. And so that time lag could be one explanation. But there's some who are a bit pessimistic, and they say, frankly, these recent innovations in the digital space, if you want, don't really make up for the kind of innovation that we had in the past, be it electricity, but even many others, be it air conditioning or commercial flight, etc., that propelled productivity in the 70s, for example. So that is a more pessimistic explanation. That is simply we no longer invent the things that really boost productivity the way the inventions have done in the past. And a third explanation is a technical one, but it has to do how we measure productivity, and that is simply a form of output over the input. And the output is gross domestic product in our case, and input is working hours. And in a digital age, there may be particular reasons that our measure of output, i.e. gross domestic product, may not be very accurate. And I cannot go into too many details here, but it's a measure that effectively requires market prices. And ultimately, it was something that was developed in the 40s. It was really, really developed for a world of manufacturing where you had some measurable output, hard output, and in a world where you have a lot of services, digitized services that don't have a market price. And all these things that you do, that you consume, for example, on your portable devices, and the things that you do on them that don't have a market price, but still have an economic or have a value, a consumer value to you, they would not necessarily show up in the way we measure GDP. And it's not a new phenomenon. That always was the case. But in a world with a lot of digital products, it may be exaggerated. And so that third argument basically says maybe output is much higher than we officially show in our GDP statistics. And therefore, by the same token, the productivity is probably better than we think.
Yes, can I just sum it up a moment and maybe we step forward because we say many things. First of all, looking at the history of innovation, we see that there is typically a time gap between when innovation is effectively realized and when the productivity is gained in terms of higher productivity growth rates. This might be due to a few things. For example, not only innovation needs to be created, but needs to be accessible, needs to become a mass market. You can think about the 100 years it took from the invention of the steam engine until everything had an impact everywhere in the production and the capitalistic economy. The same happened with the light bulb. Electricity took time before it could be available everywhere. And the same happened with the personal computer. It took almost 15 years, if not 20, 25, to see the immediate, the realization of those productivity gains since 1971, when the personal computer was invented. However, you said that we are now living in a moment where the productivity growth rates are declining. That means, yes, the GDP is positive overall, but it grows at lower rates compared to the past. And most economies are puzzled because they don't know why everyone is experiencing the mobile phone and the digital economy. So we might assume that this is already pervasive, accessible to everyone, but the productivity didn't catch up. So now, with that in mind, one element that you just mentioned is that it can be that as mobile powers the platform economy, that means digital apps, it can be that we are working for free for Facebook. And if we work for free, that is not part of the creation of GDP because when we take pictures, when we post on social, we increase the value of the platform, but that is not an economic unit that is recognized and measured in the GDP framework. Now
and we consume for free as well.
And we also consume.
We consume all these things that don't have a market price, right? So the consumer experience may be there. It's both, yes.
Yes. So now with that in mind, so we say there could be limitations in the way we measure things, right? So we recognize that. But then your work here in research was thinking about the fact that the digitalization expands and continues. Now we're experiencing the surge of AI through generative AI, which is at top of every conversation in the industry, among friends, on the media. So the question is, can AI basically reignite the productivity rate? Now, one thing that comes to mind to me is if there is a time gap between when invention is created and when the gain starts being realized, I would say that AI is not a new invention. So starting from the 1950s, the AI world experienced many advances. There was also winter of AI when industries thought that maybe they could not make it happen. And now we're in a moment where AI is really booming, also in the chip making industry, so not just on the algorithmic side. So that might spell that, I don't know if that's your thought, for the fact that not being new, maybe this is the time when AI, though many people think is new because they're not aware of the decades of investments, maybe there is a time when the productivity can be gained. Is that correct?
Yes, I think what is new about AI, and you're perfectly correct in explaining that this is this is not AI is not new and it existed for a while. But what is of course new is the success of these large language models, and I think you mentioned already earlier what is important for an innovation to become relevant for productivity on a global scale or on an economic scale, an aggregate scale, is that it's accessible and pervasive. It needs to become something, and you may smile about this, it needs to become a GPT, but not a chat GPT, but what we economists call a general purpose technology. And maybe now with AI, in the form of large language models, that does seem to have the aspects of what makes it a GPT, a general purpose technology, in the sense of it suddenly is accessible easily to people you don't need to know code. You can prompt in with English language typically, but with language, it seems to be affecting a very broad range of activities throughout different sectors. And as I said, accessible by everyone. And it doesn't seem to need a lot of new infrastructure. I mean, you mentioned data centers need to be built. There needs to be more computing power. Data needs to be there. But a lot of the basic infrastructure that is needed already exists. The connectivity through the internet, and that I think could be the breakthrough where maybe what we've been waiting for, that push that we suddenly see productivity gains could have happened now through AI, in particular through the large language models and everything that comes around it.
So which are the three long-term challenges that the paper identifies against which you investigated the potential of AI to reignite the productivity growth rates?
We have essentially, I think, challenges in the developing world, which are demographic. And I think this is very clear. We have aging populations in almost all advanced economies to different degrees. But we already see it now happening in Europe and Japan and even in the US to some extent, that there's a lack of labor force in a way as people the working age population becomes less, and we have more old age. And there, I think there could obviously be a certain substitution of having less workforce, but with enhanced productivity, where I certainly could help with growth in advanced economies. Secondly, there is something going on in emerging markets and developed economies, or developing economies better, where we have at the same time still often quite low labor productivity. And I said, that labor productivity was not growing as we would have wanted it to be in advanced economies, but that is just about the growth. The fact is the level of productivity in emerging markets is much, much lower in developing economies, of much, much lower than advanced economies. And it has no longer been catching up recently as it used to. So there AI could help. And it would probably help in a way that it could potentially boost productivity, in particular in service industries. Because the past model for emerging markets typically to catch up to advanced economies has been through manufacturing. There's been a typical model where the rural population moves to urban centers, gets employed in factories and in manufacturing goods that then get exported. And that has driven up productivity growth in emerging markets, typically moving people from low productivity rural areas into the manufacturing sector for export goods. That is no longer happening. We have a phenomenon that economists describe as a premature deindustrialization, where we have economies that are already having falling shares of manufacturing and industries, even though they're not yet rich. And it looks as if the development model from here on needs to be in services. And obviously AI has great promise to help developing and emerging markets workforces to gain productivity in those areas.
We said at the very beginning of this episode that AI has three characteristics that seems to indicate that as it is maturing now, the impact can be positive. First of all, it is not new, but now is capable of leveraging infrastructure that has been created in the last 20 years to expand its penetration into many industries and individual activities. Second, it is broadly accessible. Everyone has a smartphone. Everyone can connect to the internet or a large part of the world population. And third, has the power to augment individuals. But which are the negative effects that this paper also addresses in terms of making sure that there is a balanced perspective, right? So the good, but also mitigation of the bad. Let me ask you to comment on the three of them. We said AI is not new, but it's growing fast. Does it mean that regulation is not ready for AI?
Well, I think AI certainly creates additional challenges for regulations because it is moving very fast. It's often difficult to understand, and sometimes the developers themselves obviously admit that they cannot always fully anticipate how fast it is moving or what it does or how it does things. But I think there is in general the aspect with all new technologies, but in particular with AI. How it affects workers. And there's always the one element where it can augment, workers, make them more productive, maybe change their job, but they keep a job or they get a new job. And there's always the aspect of substitution, where workers are no longer needed because their work is completely substituted rather than augmented. And in the past, I think, obviously, there have been often the fears about rising unemployment, that machines were taking over. And that never has happened because typically there was some substitution. But typically what there has been much more widely was augmentation. So people became more efficient in what they did and increased their productivity, increased their incomes. People who were substituted often found work in entirely new sectors. And therefore there they gained income, and unemployment typically went down over time rather than up with new innovations, with automation, etc. And I think the question with AI here is, however, could it come to a point where AI is so good that it just substitutes and you no longer have this effect of augmentation? And I think that is, of course, a challenge that maybe technologies in the past did not really create the way AI could create at this point.
Okay,
not at this point, maybe, but in the future.
Now, there's no many companies that they can do AI mass market today. Is concentration an issue when it comes to economic growth?
Well, I think digitization has posed challenges in how we look at concentration, at potential monopoly power, at trust behavior. And that is obviously being discussed at the moment. With digitization, you have these network effects, these winner-take-all effects, and obviously they get possibly even increased with AI. So I do think AI therefore poses additional challenges in this area.
So then we said that AI is not new, and it has the characteristics today to contribute to the increase of the growth rate on world economies. But what is important is that there is a continuous and open collaboration among all of the actors involved, industries, the technology makers of AI, institutions like banks utilizing AI or other corporate making usage of the technology, governments and regulators. And I believe that this paper contributes to shaping this debate in better terms. So Christian, I thank you for the opportunity you gave us to share content with us. I recommend everyone to read this paper, which I believe can be downloaded from the web pages of Barclays Investment Bank, correct?
That is correct.
So I thank everybody who attended this episode 6, 233 of the Banker's Bookshelf, and invite everyone to stay tuned for more as more episodes and research discussions are coming. It is now clear that the Banker's Bookshelf is our collective moment of critical reasoning. We get inspired by authors and researchers like Christian Keller of the most interesting books, papers, and publications, which have found their prominent space in the libraries of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs. With that, we can all make better informed business decisions. Arrivederci and enjoy the jingle.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with Fintech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.